Shocking new allegations about Sir Keir Starmer, as per a Daily Express investigation, are going to put you on the edge of your seat tonight.
Watch how tensions explode in the Commons as a brave MP repeatedly grills Keir Starmer over the Peter Mandelson controversy, only to be met with deflection after deflection. This isn't just another political exchange. This is a Prime Minister under intense pressure, dodging the same question not once, not twice, but 4 times. With accusations mounting and patience wearing thin, the atmosphere turns electric. Is this accountability or avoidance at the highest level? Before we continue, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to Britain Daily. It's completely free, and it helps us keep bringing you the hard-hitting stories that matter. Let's watch this explosive clip.
On top of that this week, the failure to condemn and sack...
Order. And I will repeat again, I'm not responsible for the answers, but it's certainly not opposition questions.
Every week the Prime Minister comes here and reads out this pre-scripted nonsense that bears no resemblance to the questions he's actually asked. The Leader of the Opposition asked him about Peter Mandelson and he answered about the war in Iran. The Leader of the Opposition asked him about Mandelson again and he answered with an attack on the Shadow Justice Secretary. He was asked about Mandelson again and talked about protests in London. What is he scared of? What is he hiding? For a man who has spent years presenting himself as a forensic investigator, he has certainly had a blind spot to the details for this convicted paedophile with a friend in high Labour places. So I shall ask him again. When he found out that Lord Mandelson had an ongoing relationship with the convicted paedophile Jeffrey Epstein, did he speak to him personally before appointing him ambassador to the United States?
Mr. Speaker, we've set out the process. It is being put before the House. But I know why they don't want to. They don't want to talk about the war because they supported going into the war without thinking through the consequences.
So let me ask him now. Did the Prime Minister personally speak to Peter Mandelson about his relationship with the convicted paedophile Jeffrey Epstein before appointing him as our ambassador to Washington?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, let me start where I must. This was my mistake in making the appointment, and I've apologised to the victims of Epstein. I do so again. The government is complying with the humble address in full, but we are also continuing to support the police in their investigation. The matter of process was looked at by the independent adviser on ministerial standards. It's clear the appointment process wasn't strong enough, and that's why I've already strengthened it. But it was my mistake, Mr. Speaker, and I've apologised for it. She should follow suit and apologise for a gross error of judgment in calling for the UK to join the war in Iran without thinking through the consequences.
Mr. Speaker, I know he doesn't want to talk about the documents he tried to bury last week. He's going to try and talk about anything else, but he's not going to get away with it.
Dave Dougan.
Mr. Speaker, before the election, this Prime Minister said he would lower energy bills by £300. Since he took office, they've gone up by £149. He said he would protect the winter fuel payment, but now he's in power, he stripped it off our pensioners. And he said he lined up for many photos with waspy women, saying he'd have their backs, and he's just betrayed them in the most scandalous way possible. This is now the defining characteristic of this one-trick phony Prime Minister who says one thing and does another. In Scotland, the SNP are 16 points ahead in the polls. Does he understand? Does he understand why the people of these islands, especially those of us in Scotland, treat him with such contempt?
They used to ask those questions. They used to ask those questions from this sort of area with very many MPs not so long ago. That all changed in July, and he's now carping from right up there. We can hardly hear him.
Debbie Abrahams.
Credit where credit's due, it is right to impose tariffs and quotas, but that, Madam Deputy Speaker, is as far as it goes, because otherwise it is visionless and it is hamstrung by net stupid zero. I mean, you've got the absurd situation that the public sector is buying tens of thousands of tonnes of steel from China rather than from Scunthorpe and British Steel. This is a complete betrayal of thousands of workers in Scunthorpe. There's no vision. Will the Minister confirm when will the blast furnaces be closed at Scunthorpe, whereas Reform will renew and replace them? And will the Minister guarantee that the electric arc furnace in Port Talbot, when it's built, that it will definitely open for business?
Secretary of State.
So his point seems to be, and can I also welcome, I haven't had an opportunity yet, the shadow, or as I say, the shadowy Secretary of State, the self-appointed to his position. He seems to say that despite the investment we're putting in, despite the protections we're putting in, despite the modernisations, which he recognises are all good, despite that, it's not quite visionary enough. However, in his contribution, wasn't able to actually point to a vision for a more comprehensive future for the steel industry. He also seems to think that electric arc furnaces are woke. But let me just say that there is nothing woke about an electric arc furnace, which, when rolled out for the transition, will create us as a market leader globally, which is what the industries themselves are calling for. The British domestic suppliers and for those who are demanding that steel is requiring into the future. And I can assure him we are on the side of the industry and its vision. We are matching its ambition, its potential for the future. He wants to cast us back into the past.
Shadow Home Secretary Crystal.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Last Wednesday, the Prime Minister told this House that no minister or special advisor was involved in the handling of the China spy case. Why has the House been told, including just now, that ministers and advisors were not involved in any way when the Sunday Times reports that they were? And can the Minister confirm that Dan Chugg from the Foreign Office was at that 1st September meeting? And can the Minister also confirm it was the same Dan Chugg who approached the Lord Speaker with a proposed deal in which the Chinese ambassador would be allowed back into Parliament? Why has the government been providing this House with inaccurate information? And why did ministers know what the CPS wanted but refuse to give it to them?
Mr. Speaker, with great respect, given that this urgent question related to the activities of the Home Office, I'm not at all clear why the Shadow Home Secretary thinks it's appropriate, given accusations that have been made previously about hanging officials out to dry, to name an official in the Foreign and Commonwealth Office. How does that relate to the urgent question that was asked? Now, I do wonder, Mr. Speaker, when...
Sorry, I think I need to help a little bit. It is in order to mention another department. You can't ring-fence it without other people. I'm sorry, it might not be comfortable, but the fact is the question's being asked that is within order, and that's what matters.
I'm simply pointing out to the Shadow Home Secretary that members opposite had previously criticised ministers and the government, to use their words, for hanging out to dry officials, and the Shadow Home Secretary has just named twice an official from the Foreign and Commonwealth Office.
What you've just witnessed is a moment that perfectly captures the rising tension at the heart of British politics. Keir Starmer entered that exchange knowing full well what was coming. The questions around Peter Mandelson, the timing of the document release, and the links being raised, these aren't minor political distractions. They strike at the core of trust, transparency, and leadership. And yet, what stood out most wasn't just the question itself, it was the response. Or, perhaps more accurately, the lack of a direct one. 4 times the same question was raised. 4 times the focus shifted elsewhere. Whether it was the process, broader government actions, or even unrelated political attacks, the central issue remained unanswered in the eyes of critics. And in politics, perception often matters just as much as reality. Because when a leader appears to avoid a question, especially repeatedly, it raises a bigger one. Why? Now, to be fair, Starmer did acknowledge fault in the appointment process. He issued an apology and committed to strengthening procedures. That's significant. But for many watching, it didn't go far enough. The question wasn't just about process, it was personal. Did he know? Did he ask? Did he act with full awareness? Those are the questions that hung in the air and never fully landed. Meanwhile, the pressure from the opposition was relentless. The framing was clear. This wasn't just about a mistake, it was about judgment, about whether the Prime Minister exercised the level of scrutiny expected at the highest office in the country. And then there's the wider context. This exchange didn't happen in isolation. It comes at a time when Starmer is already facing challenges, from international tensions to domestic pressures on the economy. Moments like this don't just add to the pressure, they amplify it. Because politics is cumulative. One difficult week can be managed, But when controversies stack up, when narratives begin to form, and when opponents sense vulnerability, that's when things escalate quickly. The reference to the document release timing only added fuel to the fire. Critics argue it was an attempt to minimise scrutiny. Supporters may say it was procedural, but again, perception is everything. And in that chamber, perception was shifting. The repeated attempts to redirect the conversation toward other issues, like foreign policy or opposition decisions, may have been strategic, but they also reinforced the sense that the original question was being sidestepped. For viewers, that creates a powerful impression. This wasn't just a debate, it was a test of leadership under pressure, a test of transparency, and perhaps most importantly, a test of how accountability is handled when the spotlight is at its brightest. The real question now is what happens next. Will there be clearer answers? Will this issue fade? Or will it grow into something bigger? Because in politics, moments like this don't disappear. They linger. They get replayed, analysed, and remembered. And for Keir Starmer, this may be one of those moments. If you found this breakdown insightful, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to Britain Daily. It's completely free, and it helps us keep bringing you the biggest and most important stories shaping the UK today.